What's going on, everyone? You're welcome once again to dbt channel, and on today's video we're going to be talking about one of dbt's most powerful features. Have you experienced a long time waiting on your data transformation models to rebuild all the time? We are looking for ways to optimize costs in your data warehouse. Now the solution for you is dbt incremental models. On this video we're going to talk about dbt incremental models, what they are, how you can use them, when you should use them, and how you could begin to optimize your data warehouse costs and also your model runtime using incremental models. So what are incremental models? Now think about it this way. I'm sure by now you already understand the different materialization available in dbt. There is a table materialization, view materialization, ephemeral, and incremental. Your table, when you materialize a model as a table in dbt drops that table and creates that table again, right, within your data warehouse. If you materialize a model as a view, dbt just stores that view or that model as a view or a set of queries within your data warehouse. In other words, there is no data stored in your data warehouse for that model. All dbt just stores for that model is the query, so that whenever you run that model, you just rerun that query whenever you want it. However, on a table standpoint, you recreate the table, the model, that's the model and all its data within your data warehouse all the time. Now this is good, but however, when your table has millions of record and billions of record, this can become a problem because you would have to drop that table and recreate it all the time. Now this is where incremental model comes in. Incremental model, really, as the name suggests, it's just about you building or adding or processing only new records into the table. So there's already an existing table, dbt does not drop that table, but then dbt adds new records or modified records into that table. Now if you take a look at this image on your screen, you notice that we have our source data and then we have our existing model, which is this model we are referring to. So when doing incremental models, you'd have to put in your incremental flag, right, or your incremental filter, and you usually refer to that model using this, as we'll see as we go forward. Now you notice that the next step, you have new records. Now for your incremental model, what dbt does, dbt adds these new records into the existing model. Right, so it does not drop this existing model and recreates it the way you would do for a table, but then it just adds or appends or merges these new records into the existing records. And then the last form of incremental model is a full refresh. So you could do a full refresh where dbt would fully recreate that table or that model within your data warehouse afresh without all the incremental syncs, as it were. So why do incremental models matter? Incremental models, they matter because, one, performance. They help you improve your compute time. So imagine you had to rebuild a model that has records of millions of records every time. It's going to take time to rebuild it. But then if new records just come into that table source, in the source table, and let's say a few hundreds or a few thousands of records every day or every 4 or 6 hours, it's more performant for you to actually bring in those updated records as opposed to recreating that table with millions and millions of records all the time. Another benefit is cost. Now you understand that in modern data warehouses, compute cost is actually more expensive than storage cost. So instead of trying to recompute that table with millions and millions of records, dbt would actually help you to just recompute only the records that are new or updated. So that way it helps you optimize costs and save your data warehouse query costs. Another benefit of incremental model is reliability. So if you have your incremental model, say, running every 6 hours or every 24 hours or every 12 hours, if there is any downtime or failure, you can easily just check the particular batch that is being incrementally added, as opposed to having to run through or every run whatever. So basically just helps you to manage stuff, to know where there's a point of failure and easily debug to identify those points of failures. Alright, so how does dbt incremental models work? By default, dbt incremental strategy is the merge. Now, on data warehouses that support the merge statements, what dbt does, it just basically picks in those updated records from the source and updates that updated records in the table of interest. So it doesn't delete existing record, it just merely updates that record based on the updated timestamp and also unique key or unique field you have specified when setting up your incremental configuration, incremental model configuration. For models that do not support merge statement, that's using the dbt's incremental default settings, the merge is first done by a delete and then an insert statement. So dbt runs a delete that identifies records that have been updated in the source, deletes those records, and then inserts the new record into a data warehouse. Alright, so there are 5 dbt incremental strategies. There is append, there is merge, which is the default dbt incremental strategy. There is insert and overwrite, there is delete and insert, and then there is the micro batch, right? So we're going to look at all these incremental strategies, and I'll add a link to show you a documentation where you can see the different incremental strategies and which data warehouses they support, so you could know which to use per time. Alright, so let's start with the append strategy. Now, as the name implies, the append strategy just appends, right? Basically, it just adds new records, right? It doesn't delete existing records, it just adds new records. Now, this is useful if, for example, you do not have an updated timestamp, you only have a created timestamp, and you don't expect existing records to change, you only expect new records to come in. So, simple and short, an append only strategy could work for that. Another strategy is the merge strategy. Like I said, the merge strategy is the default dbt default strategy, where for data warehouses like Snowflake that supports merge, dbt just deletes, identifies updated records, deletes those records, and then brings in new and updated records into the data warehouse. That's the merge strategy. The next method is the insert overwrite. The insert overwrite strategy can be used when you're working with partition data and you really want to increment the data based on partitions. So the insert overwrite is going to insert and overwrite existing data in a certain partition based on how you've defined it, right? So that's really where to use insert overwrite strategy if you are looking at incrementing your data based on partitions, right, within your data. And then we also have delete plus insert. Like the name implies, dbt deletes records that are updated and then inserts new record and updated record into the existing table in your data warehouse. So the next incremental strategy we have is the micro batch strategy. Now the micro batch strategy is the new guy on the block, right? It doesn't really come to replace the other strategies, but more like a complementing the other existing strategies. Now the micro batch strategy works best when there is when the table you're working with is a large time series table. Right, think about models that are built on an activity schema that has a timestamp, an event timestamp, right, and it's very large, like a time series table. So micro batch strategy is usually best for that because it relies heavily on an event timestamp for that micro batch to happen, right? It brings in, instead of having to to update records based on your desired, let's say 12 hours and 4 hours increment, you could actually bring them in micro batches, say every hour, 1 hour. So based on that time series, is able to bring in or update records every hour within your data warehouse, right? So probably have another video that explains more the micro batch strategy and how it differs from other strategies. Now, looking at all these strategies, how do you determine which strategy to use for your incremental model? I think one of the first things you have to look out for is your data warehouse you are using, right? Because some of the strategies support some data warehouses and do not support other data warehouses, so you have to check for that first. And then you also want to now check the reliability of a unique key, because if dbt is going to update a record that exists already, it has to have a way to identify that record, and one of the ways you can identify that record is a unique key in that table, a unique ID on that table. So the reliability of the unique field or unique identifier of your table would also affect the strategy you're going to use when trying to build your incremental model. And then of course the volume of your data, right? The larger the data, the more you want to understand the strategies and discover which works best for you and also best for your data platform to help you achieve your goals, which I believe are performance and also managing costs within your data warehouse. All right, so we're going to just use this example from the model we used in our last example, in our last video, right? So basically, for you to use incremental model, one of the parameters or argument for the config block is materialized. So you're going to say you're materializing, you're going to add this materialization materialized argument and say you're materializing as an incremental model, right? You add a unique key, you define a unique key, and in this case I say candidate ID, and then your incremental strategy. If you don't define your incremental strategy, dbt is going to by default use merge strategy, where that applies to the data warehouse, and if it doesn't apply to the data warehouse, it's going to use the next available next the default strategy for your data warehouse, right? And then for append, like we said, appendability just does not delete an existing record. It does not check if that record exists before. It only just brings in new record. And so after you've done this in the config area, at the bottom you are going to add this is incremental macro. So what this is incremental macro is typically doing is just going to help dbt identify the maximum record using the date field in your model from your data in your data warehouse, and then only bring in records where the date is greater than the maximum date in your existing data. This here is referring to this model, right? Within this table in data warehouse. Remember, we said for incremental models that dbt is not dropping that table. Dbt is only bringing in your records and adding it into the existing table structure, right? So really, this is just an example of how this incremental model works. When you begin to materialize your models, your large models as incremental models, instead of having dbt process all the records over and over again at each dbt run, for each dbt run, dbt would what's it called? dbt would only process the new records from the source that have been created. All right, and yeah, really, that's really how it works. And then if you want to do a full refresh, you can run dbt run, select full refresh. That way, dbt will just full would rebuild that model again without the incremental loads. Yeah. All right. So really, I hope that helps, and I like to hear how you're using incremental models. One of our videos coming forward, we're going to talk about micro batch in details, and probably show more detailed examples on incremental models. All right, thanks so much for watching. I hope you got the thing or two out of this. Don't forget to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and also the notification bell. Thanks so much. See you again in our next video. Bye bye.